Good morning, everybody. My name is Nick Pollard, and this morning we're going to be talking about the Trojan Within. As the city of Troy learnt, Trojans can have some nasty surprises in store. And of course, these days, Trojans refer more to sort of malware and bad applications that have some pretty nasty surprises. However, Trojans can also be looked at in the old sense, something appearing to be good but has malicious intent. Could the word Trojan also refer to people who have inside knowledge, perhaps trusted by their peers and by management, but it has some sort of malicious intent? Maybe their intent is nothing more than using the company's resources, but against policy. So we're going to explore that in the next sort of half an hour or so, as we kind of go through one of the most world-renowned insiders. What we're hoping that you'll get from this webinar will be sort of gain a better understanding of what forms Trojans can take and what risks they might pose to you as a business. We're also going to learn how Nuix's range of technologies can help you plan, prepare and respond to these types of events, what types of behaviours these Trojans may bring to you. We're also going to hear how businesses are already applying Nuix and the suite of technologies that we offer to better protect their businesses. But first, let's just have an introduction of the speakers. So my name is Nick Pollard. I'm the Director for Security Intelligence for EMEA. I've been with Nuix for 15 months now, and I have the pleasure of bringing our security and intelligence products into the European and Middle Eastern African market. I'm joined by James. James, could you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Nick. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Very brief introduction to myself before I dive into today's topic. I've been involved in the world of digital forensics and investigations for about a decade now as a practitioner, also over into e-discovery and breach instant response capacity. I work as part of the cybersecurity team within Nuix, and I've been focused on developing our offering in the cybersecurity space over the recent years. The capability of our data platform really has matured and expanded rapidly over the last couple of years, helping investigators, security analysts, data scientists, all do more with our solutions and better protect themselves against the range of threats they encounter on a daily basis. So I'm really pleased to be joining you today, Nick, and involved in this webinar.
Thanks, James. So over to you.
Okay, so I guess the best place to start really is what do we mean when we say a Trojan? And I touched on it there a little bit, Nick, but in a very broad sense, it's something that misleads us as to its true intent, usually pretending to be something that's harmless or good, when in fact its true intent is bad and actually intends to cause us harm in some way. So let's talk about where this term originally came from. So we hear people using the term Trojan quite a lot today, especially in relation to malicious computer programs. But to be more accurate, we're always referring to a Trojan horse when we use this term. But the term Trojan horse predates computing by thousands of years. In fact, it dates back to a legend almost 3,000 years in the making. It all ties back to one of the most important events in Greek mythology, the Trojan War, a decade-long siege of the city of Troy by the ancient Greeks, all in the name of a beautiful captured princess, Helena of Troy, otherwise known as Helen of Sparta. So having had no real success breaking the perimeter security walls of the city of Troy, and having exhausted all efforts so far, the Greeks decided to favour brains over brawn. So they constructed a huge wooden horse and hid a select force of Greek troops inside that, before then pretending to sail away and retreat. The Trojans pulled the horse into the city, treating that horse as a gift and a symbol of their victory over the Greeks. But of course, this was no ordinary gift, and that night the Greek soldiers crept out from the belly of the horse and opened the gates of the city to the rest of the Greek army. So this gift was full of malicious intent and misled the Trojans, posing as something harmless when in fact it was intended to cause harm. And of course today, this term is now fairly widely used in cybersecurity. But this term was probably first coined in computing in the very early days of computers themselves. It was a term for describing malicious computer programs which hide their true intent and mislead us into believing they're not malicious at all. And in the mid-1980s, it was Ken Thompson, features on the slide there, co-author of Unix. He presented a paper named Reflections on Trusting Trust. There's a really interesting account of his work where he created a version of the C language compiler that, when presented with source code for a login program, the compiler would automatically compile in a backdoor to allow him to enter that system. So in other words, in order to turn computer program source code into a fully functional program, it needs to be compiled using the compiler. But what if this compiler added a backdoor to the source code when it's being turned into a program? How would we know that? Well, we can go one level deeper than that. The compiler itself is basically a program. And even more interesting, he added the ability for the compiler itself to recognize that if it was compiling itself as a new C language compiler program, it would actually then re-inject the capability to add a backdoor as well. So it's almost impossible to know whether Trojans existed within that program, no matter what level you were looking at it from. And Ken went on to say that the impact of this finding was that you really can't trust any computer code that you did not totally create yourself. So no amount of source level verification or scrutiny is going to protect you from untrusted source code. So with this in mind, malicious programs hidden within legitimate services and applications are always going to be clear and present danger in the modern world of computing. So we know malicious code can be hidden inside legitimate programs, but what type of malicious code is normally added in these scenarios? What are the common components of a Trojan horse? As Ken demonstrated, you could certainly add a backdoor to the system to allow you unauthorized access to the system in future. So giving the attacker remote command and control to the system, which is actually running that Trojan horse program. There's many other payloads that legitimate programs can and do carry, such as keyloggers. So quietly monitoring, storing, and even sharing all keyboard presses made by users, capturing their communications, their usernames, their passwords, credit card numbers, you name it. Maybe the program contains a hidden malicious payload which exploits another program on the system, compromising that system and the data on it. And then once that exploit has been carried out, then maybe then it opens up a backdoor to maintain access for the attacker. Or maybe the payload contains elements known as worms, so code that ensures the malicious code is communicated out to other systems in some way in an effort to replicate itself and infect and compromise other systems along the way. Or maybe the hidden aim is to force upon the user certain adverts and monetize their control of the system in the form of adware. So those are the kind of common components of a Trojan. But ultimately, if the purpose is to cause harm or compromise or control the system in any way, rather than carry out the advertised legitimate service, then this could be considered Trojan horse. As we know, the Trojan horse term is pretty broad and doesn't necessarily limit itself to malicious computer programs. It can actually be applied in terms of people. So people who claim to mean no harm, but their hidden motives are actually pretty malicious. And in today's session, that's what we're most interested in talking about, this point of view that if we talk about real-world Trojans rather than the computer software variety, an employee is actually your classic example of a potential Trojan horse. They are the trusted person with legitimate authorized access to the employer's systems. They're already effectively inside the city walls, and it's quite possible they may have unknown malicious intent. And this type of Trojan is notoriously difficult to identify, as they quite likely know how to avoid detection or suspicion within the environment. They're often not being monitored closely enough by the external-facing security systems. And any employee which harbours such malicious intent really does pose a great risk to the business or organisation and has the potential to cause much more damage than those on the outside of the trusted circle. So now Nick's going to walk us through a really fun insider threat use case, which almost all of us will be familiar with, no doubt.
Thanks, James. And so, yes, we are going to go on to probably one of the most famous of insiders and a Trojan, Mr. Dennis Nedry. Of course, he is most well known for being the computer programmer that was part of the Jurassic Park creation. Of course, that film was back in, I believe, the late 80s or early 90s. But of course, technology has moved on, but the malicious intent of people, that still stays the same. And of course, what we know about Dennis is that he was a administrator. He had the highest level of access to all the parks control systems. He also formed part of the security team. So that meant that he had full knowledge of how to navigate the park's existing controls. He knew how to gain restricted areas. He knew how to sort of navigate his way through the systems to maliciously do some things. And of course, as we know how the film plays out, and we're going to go through that now, just some of the sort of attitudes, and we're going to really deep dive into this sort of guy's sort of thinking. Why did he do it? What was his motivations? What were the things that he actually did? And yes, it's a bit of fun, but it has a real deep meaning, because this can and does transfer to multiple businesses worldwide. And of course, we all know that in this particular fictitious way, the risk to Jurassic Park's owners was they were about to lose a huge amount of money as a result of this guy's intentions. So let's just kind of go through the incident timeline as to how things started out in this film and how Dennis was going to put his way through Jurassic Park. So as we know, Nedry first meets this chap called Dodson in San Jose, Costa Rica. And if you remember, that little can of shaving foam that he's got there is going to be something that's given to Nedry, and it's a way that he can exfiltrate out these eggs. You know, this really valuable, obviously, commodity that Jurassic Park has developed. They've developed this thing. Okay, so the eggs are protected, and they're agreeing a time and a location for how Dennis Nedry is going to get off the island. And of course, we know that there's that ship sitting on the dock that's obviously going to take a whole load of people away, including Dennis. So James, what do you think Nedry was thinking?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So I'm going to play the role of Nedry for these slides for a bit of fun. So thanks firstly, Nick, for exposing my clever scheme to the world. That's really great. Well, as you see here, there's a lot of money at stake. So $1.5 million to be exact. I've already collected $750,000 up front in cash. And as long as I manage to get those embryos, all 15 species off the island in a good condition, I get another $750,000 on delivery. So that's $50,000 I'm making per viable embryo. Now, between me and you, and I really need that money, I've made a lot of bad decisions in recent months, and I'm a bit ashamed to say I've racked up some huge debts, which I can't cover. So I'm living out here on a remote island, away from my family, and my wage just isn't reflecting what I have to give up to make this park run properly on location. I've tried speaking to my boss, Mr. Hammond, about my financial issues, but he simply couldn't care less. He thinks it's all my fault and won't help out, even in the slightest. We've had actually a lot of very kind of public arguments about this. And to be honest, no one cares. Nobody knows about my position. Everybody knows about my position here, but nobody's actually respecting me in the organisation or the quality of the work that I'm doing for them. I'm not being paid well enough. I'm not being respected well enough. And I've got no problem with doing right by myself at this point. I'm not even sure ethically we should be breeding dinosaurs. But you know, there you go. I'm just going to get what I can from this situation. Anyway, I've got to get back to work.
Thanks, Mr. Nedry. So let's kind of have a look behind the scenes of what Nuix can actually do. And we're going to sort of track our way through Dennis's behaviour and just sort of match where Nuix does actually respond to this sort of thing. So are we monitoring employees' actions in real time? Well, actions, behaviours, and the answer is yes. We have the ability to monitor what the behaviours of an endpoint is doing in real time. So what does that really then boil down to? Well, I can start to identify perhaps unusual activities, things that I would consider to be not part of my everyday practices. So perhaps I've got cloud services that I've now started to see are being sort of constantly connected to. Are they authorized? Are they allowed to do that? Should I be concerned that this cloud service is being connected to? I have a general USB policy. We don't allow it. We don't technically enforce the USB policy, but we've made it pretty clear to everybody that it's an infringement. So yes, the system, the technology, Nuix's adaptive security technology can detect in real time the use case of USB. So yes, you could probably enforce your policies against it. But actually what we're more interested in is trying to detect the behaviour that may perhaps then suggest further wrongdoing, further things that need to be investigated. We can certainly look at the way that systems are being accessed. Is it part of the scope of the role of that person? Does it belong to the same sort of peer group that these people operate in? So can they be reported? And in fact, I've now noted that I've got a cloud service that's running. I've also got access to systems that the role typically won't and shouldn't be connected to. And I'm now seeing USB activity. This is significant. Hang on a minute, he's doing this on a Saturday evening, well and truly out of our normal operating hours. So we can start to really connect the behavioral dots to enable an organization that is monitoring these behaviors to make correct decisions based on behaviors that they're uncomfortable with. Then on top of that, you start to then look at, how do I actually pull in intelligence? How do I now start to understand what is actually going on with my employee? Is there an investigation that needs to take place? Do I need to further understand it? So we can use the Nuix Enterprise Collection Center to start pulling data into a central lab and for further investigation. If you start to connect the behavioral data that's coming from endpoints and you start connecting it to analytical capabilities, you can start to then understand, what is this guy actually doing? Who's involved in this? What are all the various different links and relationships of data with his particular sort of behavioral ways? And then finally, are we collecting all the available data sources? What else can we look at? How broad can this go? Can I start to look at things like door entry systems? Could I look at perhaps the building control systems? Should I be doing further significant checks on people? You know, what are the risks associated? Now, of course, in particularly with Dennis Nedry, he is a high-risk employee. He knows exactly how to navigate the security systems of that park. He's a real high risk to the organization. So let's just do a reality check. James.
Yeah, so we've heard a bit about how the incident is unfolding. We've heard from Nedry, and we've already had plenty of opportunities to raise the alarm through the use of applied technologies to monitor and understand user behaviours within the environment. Now we'll do what we call a reality check. So do the reasons that Nedry gave for going rogue still ring true with the motivations of employees who decide to attack from the inside these days? Financial gain certainly has in the past been a core motivation for employees to betray their company loyalties. And certainly I think that still ranks up there as one of the main risk factors. And recent reports have continued to support that idea. Even more so in the case of Nedry, he told us that he was having financial troubles and was in some debt. So if we knew that this is the case, we really should have indicated to our team internally that there was an elevated risk at present. Monitoring around Nedry's behaviour should have been tightened accordingly. And some recent studies found employees actually can be motivated to sell network passwords for not much more than £100, which is a really alarming small amount of money. So it's not surprising that Nedry is actually making his play for $1.5 million. But interestingly enough, the majority of those surveys said it wouldn't be a huge amount of money that actually would turn them in the end. They were understandably worried about how they would account for a large sum of money. So actually a smaller one, say a few thousand, would be easier for them to manage. So this huge sum certainly plays well into the Hollywood storyline, but in reality, people would actually likely accept much less. And earlier in the year, we decided to run our own survey and compile a report, which we've called the Black Report. And we focused on the source of the threat landscape and spoke to hackers and penetration testers themselves to help understand what motivated them and what we might learn in order to better defend our systems and from motivated attackers. And interestingly, we found that although financial gain still was a contributing factor for their actions, the majority were much more interested in the intellectual challenge. So Nedry maybe wouldn't require an intellectual challenge to break into the systems he's already running, but he's certainly looking to beat the system in some way, make off with highly valuable embryos, turn that into money, and evade capture, all through a carefully orchestrated set of moves designed to outsmart everyone that's working alongside him. We also found in our report that by far the biggest frustration for attackers was that organisations don't fix the things that they know are broken, with around 2/3 of the people we spoke to describing this to us. So we heard from Nedry that not only are they not paying well enough to cover his debts, but they also don't respect him. So this definitely could be a contributing factor. Could Nedry, a very smart individual, be angry about the issues with the systems that he's already pointed out, but no one's been listening to him? No one else is interested in fixing the issues apart from him. It's certainly possible that he's just become tired of that dynamic and decided to teach them all a lesson. So now let's go back to Nick and let's get back to our story.
Thanks, James. Okay, so Mr. Nedry, what are you up to now? So as we start to see through the story, he's starting to access the camera systems and he's starting to look around to make sure that he's got the relevant way of getting off the island. As you know, he's going to collect these eggs, he's got to collect all of them, but he's got to double check, of course, that the boat is there and it's going to take him on time. And as we see in the film, of course, there's a big storm coming. The boat has got a limited amount of time before it must leave the dock, and he's now rushing, thinking, "Oh my goodness, I've got to do this in 15 minutes, and I did it in 20." So, Mr. Nedry, I think you're sort of calling in from the dead at the moment, but James, you want to tell us what you're thinking?
Yeah, okay. So you've caught me looking at the cameras there, so fair enough. I'll level with you. I'm monitoring all the areas that form part of my escape route. So from my desk to the lab where the embryos are stored, out to the building, across the park and down to the east dock. And in fact, I've actually done test runs, so I've got that all planned out. I know exactly how long it's going to take me to do the full run, and which systems I need to take offline during that. I've been to the labs, I've checked the cold storage, I've gone through all the various secure doors, and I've checked which systems they run on and which cameras need disabling. So you'd think while I did this that my colleagues would have noticed this, to be honest, but they pretty much just ignore me unless they need something. And if they ask me questions or become suspicious, I just switch the topic and remind them that I know about all the little ways that they abuse their roles within the access to the park as well. I could tell you things I've seen, people fiddling expenses, I've even seen people throwing stones at the raptors after hours. So you might call it social engineering, but to me it's as simple as that I know my target and I know how they operate. So I know which buttons to press and how to use it all to my advantage. So seriously, it's like kids play to outsmart my colleagues. Anyway, I'll speak to you later. I've got to go now.
Thanks, Dennis. So what can Nuix do behind the scenes about this sort of thing? We have multiple methods of collecting data from all sorts of different sources. So what can we do about this particular scenario? So are there any sort of application accesses that we can do? Well, yeah, CCTV cameras. So could we grab data from there? Of course we could. Not live stream, but yes, we can collect data from there. Can we monitor things like phone calls? Of course we can. We can connect to the logs. But what's more interesting is that we can start to correlate those logs against other data points. So as I sort of referred to earlier, we've got door access logs relating to Nedry accessing unauthorized areas. Now, of course, he's a systems guy, right? He's an IT guy. He sat at that horrible desk that's got all the rubbish all over it. Why is he going into cold storage? What's the reason for that? So you've got multiple different ways of looking at data and thinking, what is the analytics behind this? What is the relationships? What are the things that are going to lead me to perhaps start to detect behavior that I just don't like? So we have this technology through adaptive security and collecting behavioral events from an endpoint and starting to connect it to other places, perhaps a CCTV still, perhaps the phone logs and the mobile phone systems that he's using that will enable us to start cross-referencing. We're also seeing the security systems and the door access controls. So if I actually put that into a timeline of events and put it into a chronological order, can I start to see, okay, his endpoint is doing this. We can see email messaging or we can see Skype messages. I see 5 minutes later that a door access control goes off. And I perhaps then see that there's phone logs because I have all this data available to me. I can put that all into one pane of glass and start to really consider what is the human behaviors behind this. Do I really need to start investigating this particular person? Because guess what? They should not be going into cold storage. James.
Okay, so time for another reality check. So Nedry is carefully planning his getaway, and he does, as he does this, there remains plenty of opportunities for us to spot and actually shut down his plan. So Nedry has told us he actually employed various social engineering techniques to avoid making his colleagues suspicious during his test runs, and also avoid detection by any of the systems in place that might raise an alarm. So this makes sense, as Nedry works with these people every day and he knows them very well, so he's in a prime position to play and manipulate them if he's careful about how he does that. But would attackers really go to this trouble of interacting with people within their organisation to aid their efforts? Would they risk the possibility of raising suspicions in order to do this? Well, if you've ever seen any other kind of insider attacks or hackers in movies, or know this social engineering aspect is something that protagonists uses again and again to break into buildings, systems, and evade capture. So why is this? It's because it's exactly what attackers still use to great effect in the real world. People are often one of the weakest points in the security for businesses and organizations, so naturally attackers want to leverage that to their advantage. And for our Black reports, we asked each hacker and pen tester survey whether they actually used aspects of social engineering as part of their arsenal. And an overwhelming 84% said they used elements of social engineering to gather information and manipulate their targets. So Nedry's approach is still really aligned to how insiders and attackers are working out there today. Okay, now back to Nick.
Thanks, James. So back to our story, and let's continue on with where Dennis Nedry is. And of course, he's sitting in the control room, and he's sort of talking and mumbling about he's going to go to, I think, to the vending machines. And he's starting to think, okay, I've made my phone call to the dock. The boat is waiting. I've got to really rush. I'm kind of mumbling with my words. I'm saying I'm going to go to the vending machine. Oh, and by the way, there's going to be some sort of reboots. I've done some code fixes. You'll see the phones are going to go on and offline, some minor systems, that sort of thing. But of course, we know what he's really doing. But so what he's going to do is we're now going through the point of he's got to control the CCTV cameras. He's got to look at the door security systems. I think we've got obviously Dennis on the line, so we're going to hear in a moment what he's really thinking. But of course, from Mr. Hammond's point of view, his two grandkids are outside. I think they were somewhere near the T-Rex paddock. They just put a goat in for the T-Rex to have a good bit of snacking. And meanwhile, Dennis Nedry is now shutting down various different security systems. Now, although that's a sort of a bit of drama, actually it has some real connotations for sort of today's world, in as much as if a person has that level of administrational capability, the risk and reputational damage that could be caused to any organization through this sort of behavior, be it reckless or otherwise, it could be huge. And I think we've seen time and again now, the most simplest of mistakes could cause such a huge reputational damage. Now, let's go back to our story. So, Mr. Nedry, I think you're still talking to us through that clairvoyant. Can you tell us what you're thinking?
Yeah, well, this is where the magic's about to happen, so you just watch. So I've basically sold some lines to my colleagues about resetting the systems. I do this every once in a while, so nobody's really quizzed me about this much. I took some pretty clever steps to try and disable all the auditing systems to make sure that my key logs won't be seen by the Jurassic Park logging program on my computers. I've done that just to cover my tracks, but to be honest, it doesn't even matter if they figure it all out later. I'll be long gone on that boat with my money by then. And my final swan song is a nice bit of custom code that I wrote I like to call White Rabbit. Just as I left, I fired off that White Rabbit program, and that's going to periodically disable the systems in the park, the ones that I need to grab those embryos and get myself across the island to that dock. I'd love to explain in more detail, but I've got to get this canister to the east dock by 7 o'clock, and there's a storm coming in. It's still 15 minutes drives from here, so I've got to go. I'll call you from Costa Rica.
Thanks, Dennis. Okay. So what are we doing? What are we now going to do? What does Nuix do? And of course, as we've now seen, we're kind of behind the scenes already. We're already monitoring this type of thing. So what can we actually do now if we start to see behaviors that we don't really like? Well, using the behavioral logic rules within the adaptive security suite, we can actually block various different attacks that perhaps may happen to the system. we can prevent things from actually starting on a kernel. So the example could be, in Nedry's case, he's got this white rabbit that he's going to kick off as being this piece of code that's going to switch all the systems on and off. Well, I'm pretty certain that this code does not belong to our gold build. I'm fairly certain that this piece of code has probably not been certified, and in fact, I'm fairly certain this code it should not be anywhere near any of our operational systems. So we can create logic rules that will stop that type of application from starting in the first place. No sandboxing, no algorithm checks, nothing. Just a very basic, hang on a minute, you do not belong here. Your particular method of how you've been constructed does not compute with our behavior. We're not going to let it run. We prevent it from running in its tracks. So as Nedry then, if you recall in the film, Nedry clicks his watch, he clicks the mouse, and off it goes. Well, of course, at that very moment, the agent would have kicked in, said, this is against my logic rules, I'm going to prevent that from running. So Nedry's now stuck, he's at the desk, he's hitting the button, and the thing's not launching. And that's the real reality of how we would have stopped that type of thing from happening. James.
Yeah, so let's take another reality check on what's happening now. So Nedry bashed in some commands and executed some custom code on the systems, which set off a chain of events allowing him to gain access to the embryos and make his getaway to the port. It also locked his colleagues out of the system while it ran its course. And Nick just walked us through there using some adaptive security and how we could maintain control of the endpoint Nedry is using, and quite likely stop him dead in his tracks by automatically blocking his attempts to run his code. If this is the case, then this is going to cause major issues for any attacker and potentially put an end to the attack before it's even started. So we went ahead and asked our hackers and pen testers whether our endpoint security agent would cause them problems and possibly stop them in their tracks. And 36% agreed that the endpoint security agent intelligently making decisions on the endpoint would be a major deterrent and obstacle for them. So a third of the people we spoke to or surveyed were saying that this might be enough to deter them completely, or if not deterred, would still prove a major problem for them to work around to defeat. So now Nedry is he's a computer systems administrator, so it's not surprising he's decided to automate and script part of his attack process. But do all hackers need to go to these lengths to carry out their attacks? So the ones we spoke to, 21% admitted that using their own custom code and scripts was pretty standard as part of their attacks. So think about that. If the code is being used in the attack is actually custom code, you're not going to be able to spot it with a typical antivirus engine or malware scanner because it probably never has been seen before. Its signature's never been logged before. So that's why it's important to protect your systems using the type of logic rules that Nick was describing there, with a focus on application control and behavioral monitoring. So that's something that we can define in advance. So what things should be running, what actions should and shouldn't be allowed to take place on a system. So again, Nedry's approach does seem fairly realistic, but given the right application of technology, we may have been able to actually stop his actions on the system at this point, or at least have a full audit trail being recorded, detailing to us what was carried out and giving us more chance to respond more quickly and effectively as the incident unfolded.
Fantastic, right, Mr. Nedry, I think you're about to meet a pretty unpleasant demise. So of course we now know that we watch Dennis take the embryo canister, and of course he unlocks all the doors and the systems are operating. He grabs that gas-powered Jeep. He waits for the security gates and all the various fences to start to shut down so that he can get his Jeep and he can drive to the dock. And as we then see, of course, the guy crashes. I think he what does he do? He tries to put his Jeep down, and I think, Mr. Nedry, what exactly were you trying to do?
Yeah, I don't know what to say. The weather's coming much faster than I was expecting, and the drive's taking way longer than I thought. So at one point, I actually got completely lost on the road, but I have found it again. And as you said, I just need to winch my car back down this bank and get it moving again. So it's basically all gone wrong for me. I've no idea which paddock I'm in at this point, and I've just seen a small dinosaur, so hopefully I won't see anything bigger. I've also got something in my eyes, so I can't see properly, so that's pretty worrying because I've got to drive another 5 minutes down the road. Anyway, the engine's still running, so I'm going to jump back in my car before any more dinosaurs start. If you don't hear from me in about 10 minutes, it's gone majorly wrong.
And I think we clearly do know that it goes very badly wrong for Mr. Nedry. Well, Mr. Nedry, thank you ever so much for joining us from Beyond the Grave and recounting your story. Much appreciated there. So let's just kind of...
I'll switch back to James now, so we do a bit of a wrap-up show.
Thanks very much, James. So let's just have a reality check. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, James, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So the final kind of reality check we'll touch on here. So how do we stop and reduce the risk of employees going rogue? So we talked about quite a few various applications of technology at various points during the story. So we can make sure that we've got some real-time visibility of the environment and the behaviours and the actions of our employees. Then we're in a position to catch it early with technology. So we can block attempts of malicious actions or insiders trying to carry that out. We can alert our security analysts to any unusual activity that was being monitored. It's also important that, as Nick mentioned, we bring in as many different data sources into one place as we can for investigation. So all of our live feeds, our relevant historical data, our external intelligence sources, so that we can boost our efficiency and visibility, which allows us to basically improve our response to these incidents and ultimately reduce the impact and the harm that they're causing. But what are core issues here? We heard a lot of complaints from Nedry at the start, and probably the most important one, if we think about the overall picture here, is to treat your staff well. So in a physical world, how are we going to stop people actually betraying the loyalty of the company and stealing information and so on? It's about educating the staff about the risks of stealing or mishandling company assets and fostering some staff loyalty by doing well by them. And this applies to digital assets as well. So the approach goes a long way to mitigate the risk that employees can pose if they are mistreated or they're unhappy. So maybe if Nedry was better paid, he may have that may have removed his key motivation of money that he needed in order to cover his debts. But obviously, we're not just going to pay people more just so that they stay loyal, but we should make sure that the employees feel valued in their role and feel like they're getting paid a fair wage that reflects their role and value to the business. And failing to identify that may pose more risk to businesses. And if they're not better paid, at least better respected in the work environment. So if Nedry is better treated, if his complaints about the state of the systems and issues about what needed fixing were taken on board and addressed, would he have still carried out this attack? Probably not. So remember, people work best when they're valued and trusted. So I'll hand back to Nick now to go a bit of through a very short couple of wrap-up slides on real-world example.
Lovely, thanks, James. And while I think of it, obviously, if there's any questions that you would like to pose, please do type it into the chat, and we'd be happy to answer any questions as we start to wrap this up. Let's just kind of go through the use case now of how Nuix is currently used in real live environments. And I think as this webinar has sort of gone through, the endpoint agent using adaptive security is a tremendously powerful method of seeing behaviors coming out of endpoints. The logic rules that can be created that would monitor that type of behavior and indeed take preventative and blocking actions could be very far-reaching. And in fact, a lot of our clients will modify and adapt the logic engine to suit their very specific needs. What are the actual things that are relevant to my business that are behaviors that I particularly don't want to have on my environment? What do I want to be notified about? So of course, different businesses will have different reasons for behavioral lookup. It could be that they don't have any employees in at the weekend. So any type of behavior, be it from a printing to a USB stick to somebody trying to log in, this is simply behavior that we do not expect to see. We are a 9-to-5 business Monday to Friday. No one should be there on a Saturday. Or it could be that there is a Salesforce being used, and this company have got a Salesforce, and they start to see Salesforce.com is open, and guess what? It's open on a Sunday, and the guy is using a USB device, or he's starting to do a print screen. Again, this is behavior that would be probably unusual and things that you would like to sort of start to investigate further. So it's just these behavioral triggers. What are the things that I'd look for that perhaps I need to stop, or I need to now investigate further? Some of the other technologies listed here, and we've gone through all of them in a degree over the webinar. The Enterprise Collection Center, then that's deployed out to endpoints to enable us to collect data in, pull it into a central location for further analysis. Do I need to do a full disk image? If perhaps in Dennis Nedry's case, I'm starting to see behavior I don't like, I'm going to pull that data back remotely, covertly, in a way that is safe to do, doesn't cause alarm, and I can start to investigate. Does this cause privacy concerns? No, it's perfectly acceptable within the use cases. Then, of course, we go into Nuix's Workbench, the absolute de facto place where you're going to conduct a forensic analysis. Of course, if it has the power of Elasticsearch, things are going to go really deep and wide, super fast. How can we process terabytes of data, if perhaps that's part of the case, to get to the absolute answer quickly? And of course, then finally, and as we've seen in the webinar, analytics and intelligence, our supreme piece of technology that sits over the top of the lab, visualizing these relationships from multiple different data points, allowing tremendous collaboration across multiple different types of teams. So you could have a web review team looking at the legal output. You could have investigators following their hunches as they're investigating a behavior that's been triggered from an endpoint type of behavior. All of this is heavily visualized by analytics and intelligence. I've kind of realized that all of these technologies, when they're pulled together to really demonstrate a solution, is fantastic. And just something that this slide doesn't really cover is just the multiple different use cases that can come our way. All of these technologies can be used for NISA controls if you're out in the Middle East, or it could be used for GDPR controls, or it could be used for insider threat and behavioral analysis, because that's the type of things you are. The technology is connecting it together. It's just, that's the way the reality is. That's the way our organization is now used. Our software is used within organizations. So let's just summarize. Malicious insiders may be the Trojan with the most potential damage for your business. And I think we've seen through a bit of fun today, you can clearly see that there are real tangible lines between what happened to Dennis Nedry and what has happened more recently. That behavior, that human behavior of being maybe corrupted by money or by some sort of means to then start to sabotage or destroy a business. It's just the way it is, and sadly it's a world we live in. Technology is hugely important, and especially if you can monitor in real time. The ability to see these things happening as they happen, a click of the mouse, you get an alert. It's that critical time that could prevent something huge happening to the reputation of your business. Of course, what would be even better is if you could prevent that from happening in the first place. You know, think back to the White Rabbit application that Dennis Nedry launched. If we could actually prevent that from happening, the guy would have still been at his desk now. You know, that's the type of reality of this. And I think as we've demonstrated, the end-to-end platform and the capability of just how far and broad Nuix can be is impressive. And then finally, the incident response procedures. You know, the ways that we can actually collect information and then respond to it, together with the sort of as the things of James talked about actually treating your employees with respect, pay them right. You know, give them these wellness programs, as it says, and make these guys happy. It stops the threat before it really does release the dinosaur. So on behalf of James and myself, Nick, Pollard, I'd like to thank you for listening to the Trojan Within webinar. James, if you'd like to say goodbye, if you're still on the line. Okay, he's not there.
Sorry, I'll on mute there.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining, guys.
Brilliant. And just wanted to sort of check if there's any questions. I'm just going to open that out. Janky and team, is there anything in the way of questions? Okay, so I think we've obviously answered quite a few questions. One of the questions that has popped in is just about privacy, and where does this actually fit, especially with sort of European countries that perhaps have stronger privacy connections. With regards to how we can monitor information, data can be sort of obfuscated. It can be grayed out, if you want to use that term. So the alert that comes in can be hidden. It can be showing what the alert is, what's triggered the event, but who's done it? We have to wait. We have to wait for the approval of what we've termed the 4 eyes principle, to make sure that the approval of that alert is double checked, and then it will unleash and unconnect the person that's done that, and perhaps the host name of the machine that's conducting the issue. It's a good question, thank you. Just checking if there's any other questions. No, okay. Well, thank you all. The time is 11:47 here in the UK. So thank you ever so much for taking part and listening to this webinar. James, thank you for joining from the UAE. Good technology enables us to do that, and thank you very much.